Welcome to Preservation Oaks, the podcast where we invite you to step away from the bustle of everyday life. Settle in and relax, and take a moment to leave the familiar behind as we explore the hidden gems of America that preserve our cultural past. We call them our Preservation Oaks, and with each episode, we'll journey to a different corner of the country, where we'll discover the unique histories, landscapes, and communities that make up our nation. We'll visit with local museums, historical and genealogical societies. They are the stewards of these stories. They preserve the legacy of each place like precious pieces of fabric in a quilt that binds the freedom-loving, hardworking people in this country together. So, slow down, grab a beverage, open your mind, and let us take you on a tour of the fascinating histories and heartfelt traditions that lie just beyond the horizon. This is Preservation Oaks, where every story is a stitch in the fabric of our shared culture. Now, join our host, Sean Radcliff, as he uncovers another thread in the tapestry of America's heritage and what it takes to preserve it.
Good day, everyone. Thanks for being here. We've got a great program for you today. This time on this Thanksgiving episode, we're heading over to the Pentwater Historical Society and Ms. Beth Russell, the Director of Member Services. These folks are all about bringing people closer to the history of Pentwater. They collect, preserve, and share cool stories and artifacts from the area's past. Their mission is to make history fun and accessible for everyone, whether you're a member, a resident, or just visiting. At the museum, they've created a welcoming space where people can come together, share their love of history, and connect with the community. They also work hard to put on awesome exhibits and programs that are professional and inspiring. And they're all about keeping their collection fresh and interesting, so there's always something new to learn. Come check it out with today's episode of Preservation Oaks. By the way, our main platform is preservationoaks.podbean.com, but you can find us on nearly all podcast platforms as well as Rumble, Getter, Minds, TikTok, Facebook, Odyssey, and YouTube. So wherever you listen to the program, I appreciate it very much when you like, comment, follow, or subscribe. If you're interested in being a guest on the program, or if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at preservationoaks@gmail.com. A huge thank you to everyone who's been sharing and spreading the word about Preservation Oaks. Your support means everything to us and helps us reach more people with the incredible stories we're passionate about. By getting the word out, you're shining a light on the real-life heroes who work tirelessly to protect and preserve our history. We seriously couldn't do this without you. The organizations and volunteers we feature are like the champions of our cultural world, saving our heritage with their passion and dedication. Every time you share our program, you're playing a huge role in supporting their efforts and ensuring that history stays accessible for everyone. So please spread the word, support your local museums and historical groups, and together we'll help protect our shared heritage for future generations. And thank you for being such an important part of this journey. Get ready for the next episode of Preservation Oaks. We'll be sitting down with Mark Fetter, the awesome executive director of the Manistee County Historical Museum, located right in the heart of historic downtown Manistee. This place is all about making history come alive in the coolest way possible. We'll explore the museum, a fantastic nonprofit that's dedicated to keeping Manistee's stories alive for everyone. With a team of passionate experts and amazing volunteers, the museum is open year-round, always ready to show you something new and fascinating about the county's past. You'll be amazed at how the museum connects Manistee's history with what's happening today. I can't wait to dive into this episode and explore all the incredible stories from Manistee's history. It's going to be a fun and fascinating journey through time. Hey, welcome to our Thanksgiving episode. Happy Thanksgiving to all our listeners. Despite everything happening in our country this year, there's so much to be grateful for. From everyone here at Preservation Oaks, we're sending warm holiday wishes to you and your loved ones. Here's our Thanksgiving message to you.
Thanksgiving. one of the most cherished times of the year. It's a holiday that goes beyond the dinner table.
It's a day to reflect on our roots, honor our history, and, most importantly, give thanks for the people and moments that enrich our lives.
Thanksgiving is more than just a feast with turkey, stuffing, and pies. It's a moment to pause and look back on the journey we've walked together as families, friends, and communities. It's a time to gather, reconnect, and remember the things that matter most.
From the youngest among us, laughing and playing, to the oldest, sharing stories and wisdom, this holiday unites us all as Americans.
At its core, Thanksgiving is about gratitude. Being thankful for the harvest we've reaped and the blessings that surround us, big or small. The table may be filled with delicious food, but it's the love, laughter, and companionship of those seated around it that truly fills our hearts.
For centuries, people have celebrated the bounty of the season. From the early settlers and Native Americans who gathered for a harvest meal, to families today who carry on this rich tradition.
Thanksgiving reminds us to honor the spirit of togetherness and giving thanks to God. It's about more than just a single day, it's a mindset, a reminder to appreciate life's simple joys.
As we gather around our tables this Thanksgiving, let us remember those who cannot be with us, those who came before us, and those who stand beside us. Let us honor the sacrifices made so we can enjoy the freedoms and comforts we often take for granted.
And let us extend our gratitude beyond our homes, by offering a helping hand to those in need, by reaching out to someone who may be alone, or by simply saying thank you.
From the warmth of the hearth to the crisp autumn air, Thanksgiving holds a special magic. It's the smell of pumpkin pie wafting from the kitchen, the sound of family and friends coming together, the memories shared and the new ones created.
It's a day that fills our homes with laughter, our bellies with food, and our hearts with gratitude.
This Thanksgiving, may we all take a moment to count our blessings, to cherish our loved ones, to honor our ancestors, and to celebrate the spirit of giving, gratitude, and togetherness that unites us all. From our Preservation Oaks family to yours, happy Thanksgiving. May your heart and home be filled with peace, love, and joy this holiday season.
All right, that being said, let's get this show snapping. Now here's a short bio of today's guest, Beth Russell. Elizabeth Beth Russell is the Director of Member Services at the Pentwater Historical Society in Pentwater, Michigan. A Michigan native, Beth's connection to Pentwater dates back to her teenage years when she visited family. Though her career in information systems took her to Tennessee with positions at IBM and the Tennessee Valley Authority, her heart always held a place for Michigan. In 2019, Beth and her husband made their dream a reality by relocating to Pentwater, where they enjoy the peaceful lakeside community and the proximity to family. With 2 grown daughters and a grandchild living out of the area in warmer parts of our country, Beth cherishes the time they spend together when they visit, and her visits to them bring a welcome escape from Michigan winters. Beth's role at the Historical Society aligns with her passion for preserving local history, and she finds great joy in welcoming museum visitors who come to reconnect with the Pentwater they remember, or to discover the charm of a small town's story. All right? Welcome to the program, Beth.
Thank you, Sean.
In this episode, Director Beth Russell will be sharing fascinating insights into the Pentwater Historical Society, the Pentwater Historical Museum, and the important work they're doing within the community. She'll also delve into the early history of Pentwater and share some intriguing stories from the past. Beth, I sure thank you for joining us today and for taking the time to educate us about Pentwater and the incredible efforts of your society. I can't wait to hear about Pentwater. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sean. It's good to be here because I do love to talk about Pentwater and our history. I wanted to start by giving your audience a brief overview about Pentwater. Its earliest known inhabitants were actually a tribe of Potawatomi Indians just a few miles northeast of the village. We have thick forests, or at least back then we had very thick forests of mostly white pine. That settlement of the Indians existed for some time, moving out of the area around 1620, based on evidence collected so far. These indigenous people eventually moved much further north in Michigan. The natural resources included white pine trees up to 200 feet tall, strong for their weight, easy to work with, and the logs float high in the water, easy to go down streams, rivers, and lakes to the sawmills. Pentwater Lake is a unique feature also. It's about 483 acres in size. Average depth is 22 feet, and at some points it's as deep as 50 feet. There's nearly 9 miles of shoreline, and there's plenty of sunken logs and boat debris in the lake and the marsh that precedes it. It's an all-sports lake with fishing, boating, kayaking, and hunting, of course. And there's also plenty of fishing out on Lake Michigan, with charters available right out of Pentwater Lake. So let's get started with a little bit about the European American history of Pentwater. In the year 1849, two men, Edwin Cobb and Andrew Rector, came upon this area and realized they had found a nautical highway to float logs from forests to sawmills. Overhead photography, even today, can still show, in some areas of Pentwater's river, a nautical highway dug into the riverbed to give the logs plenty of room to float down the river. Cobb and Rector purchased pine forests, primarily along the north branch of the Pentwater River. In 1853, they came back and settled in Pentwater. They built the boarding house and sawmill on a site that is now the Snug Harbor Marina. As the town grew, they mapped streets and named them after the signers of the Declaration of Independence: Ellery, Clymer, Rutledge, others, and of course, Hancock, after John Hancock.
That's real nice.
It is. It's a nice feature of the town. It's kind of cool. A footnote is that Andrew Rector, while he was a partner in Pentwater's initial years, in 1864 he was part of a vigilante mob that was outside a man's home in nearby Hart, Michigan. Rector was killed when the man shot into the mob. The shooting was deemed self-defense. Shortly after Cobb and Rector arrived and started their sawmill, Charles Mears arrived also. He was a Chicago businessman and owned many acres of forest downstate. As a young man, he had worked on canals in Massachusetts with his father's business. After his parents passed away, he and his brother stayed in Massachusetts until their younger sister was married. After that, 3 of the brothers moved to Paw Paw, Michigan, and opened a store there. They soon saw the potential in lumber, and Charles started buying tracts of land and opening sawmills, eventually building 5 sawmills up and down the coast of western Michigan. He also built his own boarding house, the Channel, which I'll talk about later, and a general store. Mears actually created the Middlesex district west of Hancock Street, our main shopping district, using names from his Massachusetts roots: Dover, Plymouth, Cambridge. He really liked his origin state, Massachusetts, and where he was born, which was Middlesex, Massachusetts. He also built a 660-foot pier out in Lake Michigan to load schooners full of lumber. If you're familiar with Lake Michigan, you know that at times it's extremely dangerous. It's hard to imagine men loading lumber onto a 2-masted schooner that is rocking on the waves. Eventually, he used his canal experience to create a channel from Pentwater Lake to Lake Michigan. What was originally a sleepy little creek turned into a full-fledged channel capable of bringing in large ships. We'll talk later about the fact that the creation of the channel cut off a number of families in an area called Frenchtown on the south side of the channel from the business district of the bustling little town on the north side of the channel. Pentwater became the largest port in Oceana County, with up to 20 schooners anchored in its safe waters, offloading goods and loading lumber. Later, in the early 1900s, the channel and lake were able to accommodate passenger and freight steamships. The leadership of the village and Mr. Mears convinced the federal government to assist with the maintenance of the channel due to the importance of the freight and passenger traffic that was coming into and out of Pentwater. Over the last 150 years, there has been a back and forth between federal support and local support. The channel has been dredged over 30 times in the last 60 years, and photos show dredging occurring in the early part of the 20th century as well. Mr. Mears married quite late in life and had only one child that survived to adulthood, Carrie Mears, who never married. The channel infrastructure has changed over the years as well. We went from wooden piers and bulwarks on either side of the channel to a narrow concrete wall. And finally, around the 1990s, the Civil Corps of Engineers installed a wide pier on both sides of the channel with additional railings for safety purposes. Our lighthouse changed as well, with the first lighthouse and superstructure resembling its more famous cousin down in Holland, Michigan, and a more expedient version of a lighthouse now that requires less maintenance. Not quite as beautiful, though. I want to interject here the origins of the name Pentwater. Over the years, there has been a lot of speculation. Some thought maybe pent meant pent-up water, where the lake was behind a narrow creek leading out to Lake Michigan.
I read that on the internet that they thought it was pent-up water.
Right. Other groups thought maybe Pent was named for 5 types of water: the river, the marsh, the lake, the creek, and Lake Michigan. To me, the most likely explanation was referenced in a Grand Rapids newspaper in the 1940s that noted that the prefix Pent is similar to a word that sounds like paint in native languages, meaning dark water. This name is actually supported by a map that one of my colleagues recently found, created in 1830, where we were actually named Pent Space Water on that map well before it was populated by European Americans. Pentwater is still a dark lake. When you stand at the end of the pier, you can see a dark cloud of water dispersing as the water comes from the lake through the channel and into Lake Michigan.
So that's why they have to dredge it, right?
Well, yeah, I think that's the currents more than anything else that force the dredging. There have been times when the channel has decreased in depth to only like 3 feet. And it's not, from what I can tell, it's not sediment. It's just simply the currents and sands shifting. So when you're on the channel, you can actually see waves coming in from Lake Michigan. So let's talk a little bit more about the channel. I mentioned that it cut off families on the south side of the channel, but it was also instrumental in making Pentwater an important hub for transportation in Oceana County. But it created a problem for those that lived on the south side. How do I get to work, to school, to the store? For a short time, there was a small boat to ferry you across the lake. But quickly, Mears realized that wasn't enough for the growing population. He also saw a business opportunity. He installed a cable ferry across the channel, which is just what it sounds like. A small rectangular barge, a cable that stretches across the water and lies on the bottom of the channel when the ferry is not in use. When in use, the operator of the ferry used a wooden maul to grab the cable and pull the ferry and passengers across the channel. We have photos that show 2 men handling mauls to make the crossing speedier. Passengers could be a goat, a cow, a horse and buggy, a loaded wagon and team of horses, or up to about 25 passengers dressed in their Sunday finery. We have photographs of all of these.
Oh, yeah. The cable ferry is really cool. What inventive people. They put the cable on the bottom. That's just amazing.
Yeah, and having the cable on the bottom allowed plenty of traffic to go in and out through the channel. Those were big boats.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
The cable ferry was in use from 1857 to 1926. Eventually, the increase in the number and size of automobiles was difficult to handle on the ferry, and it had to be retired. Next step in the progression was the swing bridge. As the ferry became a problem, a swing bridge became available from the Pierre Marquette Railroad Company further north, a bridge that was no longer needed in Elk Rapids, Michigan. It was transported to Pentwater and installed across the channel. The bridge rotated horizontally around a vertical base installed in the channel. Some swing bridges rotate at one end of the span. Ours rotated from the center of the span. Boat traffic could then pass on either side of the bridge. Not to mention, it made a great platform for diving and holiday celebrations and races. Eventually, the bridge required too much maintenance to be feasible. It was removed after a bridge was built across the marshy end of Pentwater Lake. And that's still there, and it's called Long Bridge.
Wow. What year was it built?
It was built in the 1940s, I believe. It's changed structure quite a bit. It doesn't look nearly like what it was constructed as in the 1940s and 50s. So.
Yeah, I was just surprised it's still there. That infrastructure that was built way back then is still functional. Are they planning to replace it at all?
Well, in fact, we actually had some problems a few years ago. As you're aware, the lake lake levels of Lake Michigan and attached lakes go up and down quite a bit. And in 2019, that bridge and the infrastructure around it was actually covered in water by about 12 inches.
Oh, wow.
So it had to be repaired and lifted up for a short ways. As soon as the water went down, they began some repair. But we ended up with a fairly long commute, and we were kind of wishing for that cable ferry or the swing bridge back again. So by 1866, Pentwater was a bustling lumber town. We had 5 mills. The population was about 1,500 European Americans, tall stacks of lumber drying all over town, rafts of logs along the shoreline, and sawdust streets pockmarked with tree stumps. After some competition for naming rights between Mears and Mr. Cobb, and I should say competition for not just naming rights but also leadership positions, the village was incorporated in March of 1867, uniting the two sides. They never completely agreed on street names, so you still have the Massachusetts contingent on the west side of Hancock Street, and you have the Declaration of Independence contingent on the east side of Hancock
that's
Street.
cool. That's cool. Shows you that Americans have always had an independent attitude.
We have our beliefs and we stick to them.
Yeah,
So
that's cool.
it was a busy port, sometimes sheltering as many as 20 vessels anchored or docked at the shoreline. With such a growing population, schools became an issue also. There were originally a couple of small schools in Pentwater and one in Frenchtown, south of the channel, and another in the main portion of the town. As the population grew, the village decided to build one school large enough to accommodate all the children, and they chose the location of what was or had been at that time the cemetery. Of course, they had to move all the graves to a new, larger cemetery just outside of the village, and that took almost 10 years to accomplish. The school was built, it opened in 1871, and by the way, it was a 3-story school. And immediately after it opened, there was an outbreak of illness among the students. As it turned out, one of the graves was not moved, and it happened to be the grave of someone who had died of typhoid fever, leading to an outbreak of typhoid among the school's population. The water well for the school had been dug straight through the grave.
Oh.
After remediation of this error, the school remained in use until 1961, when a new school was built several blocks away. Each year, as more grades moved to the new school, there was a procession of students on day one of the school year carrying their books to the new location 4 short blocks away. Just a note about the population of Pentwater also, and this is in regards to Native Americans. In mid-1855, the Treaty of Detroit was signed between the U.S. and the Ottawa and Chippewa Native Americans. The Indians agreed to move from their location near Grand Rapids, Michigan, to Oceana County and Mason County, just north of us. They agreed because they were promised land and a small monetary compensation. At the time, their chief, Cobb Musa, still owned a business actually in the Flat River area. He died in Oceana County 10 to 15 years after the treaty. Heads of households in this treaty received 80 acres of land in Oceana County, specifically in Elbridge Township, just east of Pentwater, and a small sum of money, about $80. It is said that those that negotiated the treaty received the largest portion of the funds included in the treaty. There are still plenty of Ottawa Indians in the area, but mostly further north of Oceana County, in the Mason County and Manistee area. In 1857, after that treaty took effect, there were 750 Native Americans that took ships from the Grand Haven area and resettled here. Their horses were walked up the beach. They camped around Pentwater Lake before settling northeast of Pentwater in the Elbridge Township area. In 1858, another 550 natives arrived, bringing the total to 1,300 or so Native Americans living just outside of Pentwater. In the late 1800s, I really need to talk about trains and the railroad that came to Pentwater. A line from Muskegon to Pentwater first opened in 1872. Freight and passengers were carried on a line that came all the way to the south side of Pentwater. There wasn't room for a turntable, so trains had to use a Y to turn around and back into the station for the return run. As tourism increased, trains were added to handle the load. At one point, there were 3 trains per day into Pentwater, because it was such a popular tourist destination. Eventually, automobile traffic increased and train passengers tailed off. The line to Pentwater was finally terminated in 1933, but we still have a railroad avenue not far from where the train terminated. The station master's home is still in use also. It was moved from its original location and it now serves as a private residence. By the early 1900s, fires had destroyed the mills, forests were depleted, and it was really the end of the lumber era. 1905, we have photos of the last mill, Sands and Maxwell, which was closed down and torn down in 1913. And the whole region then made a transition to farming. Tourism was ever present, though. It did not go away. And in the 1920s, the advent of motor vehicles even boosted the number of tourists that could come to Pentwater, whether for the entire summer or just to spend a week or two here. I mentioned early on that we know that there was a settlement of American Indians not far from Pentwater in the 17th century. Those were the Potawatomi Indians, and they lived northeast of Pentwater in an area called Dumas Creek. Artifacts from this area were discovered by a local farmer in the 1920s, and most were sent to museums in Ann Arbor, Lansing, and Chicago. The Native American items that we have in the museum now include baskets, a canoe, signage that was used in town, and a variety of arrowheads, many found along the beaches. It is thought that the Indians used Lake Michigan for transportation up and down the coast and would camp and hunt on the dunes during their travels. No history of Pentwater is complete without a discussion of the U.S. Life-Saving Station. It was first built in 1887, and while there was a nice solid wall along both sides of the channel, they actually built a ramp, and the rescue boats would slide down into the channel on that ramp built into the channel wall. They were quite active, and they always had at least once a week life-saving exercises, and you can imagine that those exercises drew a big crowd of tourists. 6 to 8 men would be in their rowed launch. They would deliberately turn it over and then have to somehow turn it upright again and climb back in. In 1915, that life-saving station became the Coast Guard station. Unfortunately, it was finally closed in 1958, and only a few elements remain today. Coast Guard consolidated, and now they're located in Ludington and Whitehall as the two closest Coast Guard stations to Pentwater. The 3 elements that remain today is a flag tower. Flag tower was there for signaling right there on the channel. And they also had an observation tower that was actually located on the beach so they could look for boats in distress easily out on Lake Michigan. That was moved into town and is in one of our marinas right on Pentwater Lake. And there was also a house behind today's Channel Lane Park that was originally built on a village lot east of Hancock Street in the 1870s and then moved to this site in the 1890s. It became the living quarters for life-saving station crew members. The house eventually became a private residence, with the owners adding a front porch and side apartment. A retired Coast Guard captain bought it in the 1930s. As he got older and was widowed, he let a local family live there for free. In return, he lived in the side apartment and they cared for him. When he died in 1967, he willed the house to the caregiving family. They eventually sold it, but still today the side apartment is labeled the captain's quarters. With so many people in town, entertainment was a must. And in turn, we've had at least 3 theaters that we know of in town. The first one, the Janet Theater, was actually the earliest. It's in a building that is still standing and is now a tavern. The theater had repurposed bench car seats to show silent movies with cozy seating for couples. It began showing silent movies in 1917. By the way, the Janet Theater received its name in a naming contest. The cutest child won the contest, and her name was Janet. Her son still lives in Pentwater. The Tower Theater was just across the street, and it also showed silent movies, but was much larger than the Janet Theater. The Miracle Theater was built using the brick remnants of the Tower Theater, destroyed in a fire in 1929. They say the Miracle was talking movies, but I almost think it should have been named the Phoenix, rising from the ashes of the old theater. Those of us that know and love Pentwater are quite proud of our heritage and our town. I want to point out that Pentwater has made the national news or TV coverage on several occasions. There was, unfortunately, a multiple murder that occurred in 1896. A disgruntled and disturbed employee shot his employer, Mr. William B. O. Sands of the Sands and Maxwell Company. The company owned a lumber company and a general store. Mr. Sands died of his injuries the day after the shooting. The employee in this story was an attorney who was convinced that he had been cheated. After shooting Mr. Sands, he returned to his own home, murdered his entire family, and then committed suicide. It was a very sad event. Famously, though, Pentwater also made national TV when we were the prize on both Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy as a vacation at the Nickerson Inn, a comfy hotel in Pentwater with a beautiful view of Lake Michigan. This happened in 2004, and the inn sadly burned down in 2007.
Oh.
So I really hope those contestants got their prize done quickly. So, and Sean, I think you're interested because our websites often show a number of fires that happened in Pentwater.
Yep, I saw a number of fires and thought, oh my gosh, things were made out of wood back then, and now you have to rebuild the whole town.
Well, we came close on a couple of occasions. Probably the biggest fire was the fire of 1889, and this kind of highlights the danger of smoking when you live in a wooden building. The fire of 1889 actually started in a cigar store, and it destroyed the 2 blocks at the north end of the business district in total. There was really nothing left. Another fire that we had happened much earlier. We actually had a shingle mill on the south shore of Pentwater Lake, and that shingle mill turned out 250,000 wooden shingles per day. It went up in smoke one day. It was insured at $20,000, but it would have cost $50,000 to rebuild.
Whoa.
It employed 100 people in Pentwater before it burned down.
And did they rebuild?
They did not.
Okay.
In fact, that ended up being the site of the train station, but no more shingle mill. The Chicago fire of 1871 was notable in Pentwater also, but obviously it did not happen here. But it did create wealth all up and down the western coast of Michigan and the eastern coast of Wisconsin. Ironically, the Pentwater Fire Department had ordered a new steam pumper, and it was sitting on the docks in Chicago when that fire occurred. Our pumper was repurposed on the spot to fight the Chicago fire. A replacement pumper for us did not arrive until 1872. I think I should probably give you a bit of an explanation about firefighting in that era. We didn't have a large infrastructure in the way of fire hydrants, and you can imagine that if you're fighting a fire at a shingle mill, there's probably not going to be a lot of fire hydrants in a remote industrial area like that.
Yeah.
But they did have a lot of long hoses. So the way a pumper truck worked was there was a steam boiler on the truck. And I say truck, it was probably safer to say that it's a tiny wagon. And the boiler sat on the truck at a low temperature while it was in the fire barn until a fire alarm went off. Then the volunteer firemen turned up the boiler to build up the temperature of the water. The horses rushed the wagon to the site of the fire. The volunteers laid their hoses and used the boiler to pump water from the lake to the pumper and from the pumper to the site of the fire. It was quite a contraption.
What a lot of effort. Wow. It would take you an hour to get the water pumping.
Right. And so by the time you're done getting everything ready to go, it probably has burned down whatever it is you're trying to save.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for that. I learned something.
Well, there's more to that story too, and I'll get to another couple of fires that will explain some more about fighting fires in small towns. There was also a furniture factory here in Pentwater, and it was the site of more than one fire. So it was originally the Pentwater Bedstead Company, and then later on, after it had burned once, it became the Pentwater Furniture Company. And then as the Pentwater Furniture Company, there was a boiler explosion which killed several people, and then the following year, another fire. And so that factory closed down for good. Then we want to talk about the Sands and Maxwell fire. Sands and Maxwell, again, the same family name that we had just talked about a moment ago, had both a general store and a very large business office. The general store and the business office were right next door to each other. The store was built out of wood, and the office building was built out of Pentwater brick, which I'll mention in a minute also. They were unable to save any part of that store when it burned up in 1920, and so that lot eventually became a park. And I think you've seen online the story of the white elephant, and I'll do more about that story in a moment. But in 1928 and 1929, there were fires in almost 2 consecutive years in the white elephant. And then finally, the Nickerson Inn. I mentioned the Nickerson Inn as a prize on some game shows in 2004. The inn was extremely old. It actually operated between 1914 and 2007. The original building held 14 bedrooms, but only 2 bathrooms. It was quite a nice place, as it had been outdated several times over the years. Mr. Nickerson died only 2 years after he opened the inn, and his wife and children operated it for 30 more years. It changed hands four more times over the next 60 years and was renovated several times. On May 21st, 2007, fire was reported at 6:30 a.m. They couldn't use the fire hydrants in town because the village water tower was drained for maintenance. Firefighters had to pump 155,000 gallons from Pentwater Lake in order to fight the fire. You might ask, how do we know it was 155,000 gallons? Well, without working fire hydrants, the next method of fighting fires is to use pump trucks. They don't need steam boilers anymore, but they do have to go down to the lake to pump the water into their 4,000 to 6,000 gallon tanks and drive the trucks back to the fire. For 155,000 gallons, there were probably 4 to 6 fire stations from the area, all using their pumper trucks and water from Pentwater Lake to help us fight the fire. And let's talk a little bit about Pentwater's notable businesses. First, I want to talk about the Pentwater Bedstead Company. I mentioned it a little bit because it had such a history with fires. It was first founded in 1882, and the reason was that beside all the pine that was shipped off as lumber, there were plenty of hardwood trees in our area also. Plenty of incoming laborers, many with skills that go way beyond just heavy labor. So the Pentwater Bedstead Company was founded in 1882 on land that was first owned by Charles Mears, and it was right there by the side of the lake. The business was reorganized, the building expanded, it renamed the Pentwater Bedstead Company, which then became a well-known brand in the Midwest. I mentioned that the powerhouse exploded, it was rebuilt, but in 1900, the whole complex again caught fire, and this time was not rebuilt. That led to the loss of 250 jobs. Now, we're pretty inventive around here, so it didn't take long, and within a year or two, the Sears and Nichols Canning Company was opened up. So right after the fire was done and they decided not to rebuild, Sears and Nichols, 2 businessmen, decided to open the canning company. At one point, that factory employed 500 people between work inside the factory and transportation of the crops from fields. The factory closed in the 1920s as transportation changed in Western Michigan, and canning and fruit processing and vegetable processing moved to other towns outside of Pentwater. And one really kind of amusing story is that we had an airplane manufacturer attempt to set up in a business here in Pentwater. Willie Leonard established Leonard Aircraft Company, and he was from Chicago. He wanted to build all-metal 25-foot biplanes and sell them to the post office. He found a large empty building with a large door to start his business. He built one plane, took off on the frozen Pentwater Lake, and then he built a second one, but couldn't find another suitable runway. So he had to move his business out of Pentwater. Leonard later applied for a federal contract for a new training airplane, but with only plans and no flyable example, he did not win the contract. He advertised his planes as all-metal biplanes. Only the tires were made of something other than metal. He was quite a character. I want to talk about the Pentwater Wire Factory also. I'm calling it the Pentwater Wire Factory today, but it's no longer there, and that is not how it started out. This was a factory that started out as essentially a small stable just off of Hancock Street, which held a blacksmith shop. And then it became a carriage shop and eventually a wire company. As a wire company and its predecessor, they had managed to invent and produce a picnic hook grill and the Pentwater Boy, a net lifter for commercial fishermen. I'm proud to say that it now holds a chip factory. You might assume that we're going to be the Silicon Valley of Michigan, but it's something far different. It holds the Fiesta Grande chip factory, by far the most delicious tortilla chips available in a variety of markets, and we're happy to have it here. Another very unique business in Pentwater was Mr. Henry Carter Johnson's business. He was a glass blower extraordinaire. His booth was a staple in the business district for over 20 years in the 1960s and surrounding years. either on the sidewalk or down a side street, where he created small glass figurines. Stools for kids to watch were situated around his booth. A price list was posted, and the adults stood around and watched also, because it was a fascinating process to watch. Some visitors to the museum come specifically to see our collection of over 100 samples of his work, and many regale us with stories of the collections they still have at home.
Beth, it's time for a break for a few minutes.
Great. It's thought-provoking talking with you. See you after the break.
Listeners, we'll be right back after these important messages.
Yeah, we're really getting into the conversation.
Are you passionate about preserving history? Do you want to connect with a community that celebrates the past while building the future? Look no further than the Pentwater Historical Society and Museum, right here in the heart of Pentwater, Michigan. Nestled along the shores of beautiful Lake Michigan, the Pentwater Historical Society has been a cornerstone of the community, dedicated to preserving the rich history of the charming Pentwater village and surrounding areas. From the early settlers who shaped the town to the maritime heritage that flows through its veins, the Pentwater Historical Society is committed to ensuring the stories of the past are never forgotten. And now we're looking for people just like you to join us in this incredible journey. By becoming a member of the Pentwater Historical Society, you'll have the unique opportunity to be part of exclusive behind-the-scenes tours at the museum, get early access to special exhibits and community events that highlight Pentwater's vibrant past, engage with fascinating local history, from the maritime roots to the industries that built the town, join a network of history enthusiasts, preservationists, and supporters who share your love of Pentwater's heritage. The Pentwater Historical Society's museum, located at 85 South Rutledge in Pentwater, is a hub of exciting programs, artifacts, and stories. With rotating exhibits, interactive displays, and events for all ages, you'll find something that sparks your curiosity. And they're more than just a museum. Preservation and history are in the veins of the Pentwater community. Whether you're a local resident or someone with ties to Pentwater, joining the Historical Society means playing a vital role in keeping history alive. Your membership helps fund preservation efforts, educational programs for kids, and community outreach that makes history fun and accessible for all. Plus, as a member, you'll be the first to know about volunteer opportunities, workshops, and new initiatives aimed at preserving Pentwater's unique identity for future generations. But that's not all. There are even more ways to get involved. Do you have an old family artifact, a story, or a piece of history that's gathering dust in your attic? We'd love for you to donate it. Your contributions help to expand the museum collection and showcase the hidden treasures of Pentwater. Drop off your donations at the museum or give them a call at 231-335-3689 to arrange a pickup. Your story could be the next chapter in our shared history.
Are you ready to join? Visit online at pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org to learn more about becoming a member, making a donation, or getting involved. Follow along on Facebook at PentH2O Historical Society to stay connected with upcoming events, or send an email to info@pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org with any questions. The Pentwater Historical Society, where history comes to life and every member is part of the story. Become a member today and help keep Pentwater's legacy alive for generations to come. That's pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org. Don't miss out on being part of something extraordinary. We're saving history one story at a time. Will yours be next?
Thanksgiving in the U.S. means different things to different people. It has a rich history, but it's also a time to reflect on who we are as a nation and the stories that shape us. So, what can we really be thankful for? How can we celebrate our differences and find common ground? I believe Thanksgiving should be a day for all of us to pause, reflect, and express gratitude, whether through prayer or simply giving thanks. It's not about one religion or background. It's a time to honor what unites us and appreciate the diversity that makes our country strong. Thanksgiving is more than just turkey and football. It's a chance to reconnect with family and friends and embrace gratitude as a core value. When we take a moment to express our thanks, whether to the universe or each other, we strengthen our bonds and create a more peaceful and happy community. Thanksgiving enables people of the United States to give thanks and gratitude to those who laid the foundations of our country, to honor our veterans and memorialize those lost. It's to celebrate the labor and production of our country, for giving the people strength to uphold our laws and our Constitution, which reigns in the power of the government. It is to recognize the strength, values, and diversity of family, which is the bedrock of our society. Gratitude and giving thanks stand out as immensely valuable moral, religious, spiritual, and healthful practices that should be actively reclaimed and embraced, especially in the secular and religious practices that characterize the 21st century United States. Offering thanks to God or the universe for our many blessings, giving sincere thanks, and demonstrating appreciation toward family members, friends, strangers, coworkers, and communities, as well as responding to others' kind acts with acts of recompense and thoughtfulness, all hold the intrinsic power to express, restore, and significantly enhance personal, familial, communal, and even national connections. These connections can lead to real, lasting, and deeply synchronous peace and happiness among individuals and communities alike, making gratitude a cornerstone of a fulfilling and harmonious life. If you're looking for inspiration this Thanksgiving, here are 10 important things to be thankful for. We can be thankful for our military, for our rights to express our opinions and participate in our government. We have the freedom to live our own lives within the law and without unchecked interference from government. We can thank the Almighty for the fabric of our society. Different cultures and perspectives make us stronger and more innovative. We can be thankful for the technology we've developed that keeps us connected and makes life more convenient and comfortable. It enables our families to thrive and achieve our dreams. We can be appreciative of our healthcare and medical facilities and the access we have to treatments which lead to healthier lives. We can be thankful for laws and standards for water treatment and food safety. We can be grateful for the preservation of our national parks, which offer amazing places to explore and enjoy nature. We can be thankful for so many good people helping each other out and volunteering, which brings us closer together. Our nation has also helped so many people all across the world every year with foods, medicines, technology, and other essentials to improve living standards. We can be thankful that we have the ability to do that. Americans have access to a wide range of schools and colleges which help us become qualified in what we love and to chase our dreams. We can be thankful for the caring people of this country working for fairness and impartiality and making a difference in our society. We can be thankful for a diverse economy which allows for job growth, personal growth, resilient families, innovation, and creativity. We have the opportunities to freely get involved in our communities and to help make them better places. Let's remember these blessings and spread gratitude not just on Thanksgiving, but every day.
And now, back to Preservation Oaks.
Welcome back to Preservation Oaks. I'm your host, Sean Thomas Radcliff, and we're here today with Beth Russell, Director Beth Russell from the Pentwater Historical Society in Pentwater, Michigan. Let's pick up where we left off, and welcome back, Beth.
Good to be back. We're just getting into the good stuff, so let's pick that up again. Sean, I think it's important to talk a little bit about steamships and how they affected Pentwater. They certainly helped Pentwater grow. The steamships, starting in the late 1800s and early 1900s, were used for both passengers and freight. And the companies in the Great Lakes became quite competitive in their pricing. When I say freight, part of what I mean is fresh fruit and vegetables and canned goods. And these were moved all over the Midwest. We have some historic photos of ships docked right alongside Pentwater's business district with tourists and commuting businessmen waiting to board. The freight was, of course, lumber too, but also furniture and the canned goods. Steamships also went away in part because of the need for ships during World War I, and then the changes in transportation throughout the nation with larger vehicles and better roads. Pentwater has a history of several historic churches also. Two of those churches met the same fate as businesses in town, meaning they were lost to fires. At one point, there were 6 churches in town, and 4 of them are still ongoing concerns. The Methodist Church was the first to hold services, their first preacher being an itinerant preacher by the name of Joseph Elliott, a man of Native American descent. The Methodist Church burned down in 1874 and had to be rebuilt, this time out of brick. The Catholic Church and Episcopal Church are equally old, but have not suffered the fate of burning and rebuilding. So they are quite interesting structures. The Baptist Church was first established in 1882, but burned and was rebuilt in 1894. That historic building now houses our museum, while the congregation built a new and air-conditioned building across the street from the historic church building. So we bought the building in 2012, and we opened the museum in that location in 2014 after refurbishing it during the season of 2015.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about Lake Michigan also. I was just talking with some visitors to the museum yesterday, and they pointed out that Pentwater, which we take for granted at times, is truly unique on the west coast of Michigan because it's situated right on the shores of Lake Michigan with its own lake and easy access to Lake Michigan through our channel. Ships under European American captains have sailed the Great Lakes since at least the 17th century. Ludington, Manitowoc, and Benton Harbor make up an area known as the Lake Michigan Triangle, in comparison to the Bermuda Triangle, where ships and airplanes have vanished. The same has happened in Lake Michigan. They estimate 1,500 shipwrecks in Lake Michigan, with only about 300 found so far. And they estimate 5,000 shipwrecks lying along the bottom of all 5 Great Lakes, totaling about 30,000 deaths. That included passenger steamships, freighters, and even the 2-masted schooners.
Do they have any idea what the earliest shipwreck is? Or do we even have records for that?
They do have some of the records, and I say European American captains because we're positive that there was plenty of Native Americans that used the waterways also. Of course, it was French Canadians early on, and then it became Americans and English that used the waters later on. I've heard of a shipwreck that they believe that went down in 1600s that they discovered along the Straits of Manitou.
Wow. And they haven't dug it up?
When they discover it, they usually leave it where it is. One of the most interesting shipwrecks that I heard of was up there in that Manitou Passage. And I think that honestly what happened was the ship encountered an ice storm and became so encrusted with ice that it simply could not sail and sank under its own weight. When they found it on the bottom, it was absolutely in pristine condition. There was no marks of anything wrong with it at all.
That is so cool. I bet you have a lot of diving in the area for those wrecks.
We do. There's actually a Lake Michigan Shipwreck Association, and we have had one of their founders in as a speaker several times at our dinners.
Oh,
and
that's
she's
cool.
always coming up with interesting stories.
Yeah, now they got robots that can go down there and look around.
That's exactly what she showed at our August dinner. She gave us footage of them discovering the sinking of what was at one time a passenger ship, but fortunately was only carrying freight on the voyage where it sank.
That's very cool. Thanks.
So let me describe a little bit about where Pentwater sits. On our section of coastline, there's kind of a concave arc along the section of coast in the Michigan coastline. We are near the narrowest section of Lake Michigan, but the lake is still 60 miles wide, with plenty of room for wind-driven waves to build in size and strength as they go from west to east across the big lake. With a strong onshore wind, large and small ships are sometimes unable to return to deep water. Once they get into that concave curve, it's very hard to get back out, and they will founder on sandbars and beaches along the coast. One such ship was the John C. Wright, a two-masted schooner full of coal and kegs of nails. It sank on its maiden voyage in 1854. Homeowners near the site of this wreck, just south of Pentwater, can sometimes see the ribs and keel of the ship along the beach when Lake Michigan is particularly high, and also continue to find large rusty nails along the beach. The intervals between when it appears is usually 20 to 25 years, matching the cycles of Lake Michigan going up and down. The most eventful wreck near Pentwater occurred in 1940 on Armistice Day, which today we call Veterans Day, and was actually 3 wrecks caused by the same storm. You may have seen the video of the Tacoma Narrows bridge collapse during a winter storm in Washington state on November 7th, 1940. The same storm that brought down the bridge then crossed the continent and combined with another storm to arrive at Lake Michigan on November 11th as a weather bomb. You can think of it as another perfect storm. Throughout the Midwest, temperatures went from 60 degrees to 0 in a very short period of time. Farm animals were lost to the storm, and it's estimated that over 50 duck hunters throughout the Midwest perished because they weren't prepared for the storm that overcame the region so suddenly. On that day, November 11th, 3 Canadian ships were cruising up the coast from Chicago to Canada, and they went down just off Pentwater's stretch of coastline, 2 with all hands lost. Each of these ships was between 250 and 420 feet long. The third ship, the Novadoc, was just 500 feet offshore and visible to those on the beach, with the crew struggling on board the foundered ship for almost 36 hours, bailing and burning furniture to try to stay warm. The Coast Guard attempted a rescue, but the waves were so high that their boat almost capsized. A fishing boat from Pentwater, the 3 brothers, thought they could make it. They rescued 17 of the 19 crew members from the Novadoc. The forward area of the ship had quarters that were protected from the waves and where they were trying to burn furniture to stay warm. The 2 crew members from the Novadoc that were lost had attempted to go from the rear of the ship to the forward section of the ship where they could stay warm, and they were lost due to the size of the waves. Witnesses estimated the waves on Lake Michigan were between 30 and 40 feet high that day. I was a docent at the museum one day in 2019 when a visitor came in who specifically wanted to see the artifacts from the Novadoc. It turns out his grandfather was the captain of the 3 brothers, and when visiting his grandparents, his bedroom was filled with the remnants of the wreck and the gifts given to the captain by the Canadian government. They were grateful that 17 of their sailors had been saved. 57 men were lost from the 3 ships that day. The 3 brothers were captained by Clyde Cross and 2 other sailors, and it's an indication of the spirit of Pentwater that he went out to save those men in such difficult conditions.
That's an incredible loss. 57 families it impacted. on both sides of the border. Wow.
Yep. And there's a story on one of those ships. I believe it was the Davok. The captain had brought his 15-year-old son along for his first cruise as an assistant on the boat. So, yeah, some pretty sad stories there.
Yeah.
There were plenty of other shipwrecks that happened right outside Pentwater also. At the end of the south pier of our channel, in 1867, Charles Mears's propeller ship, the Mary Stuart, while heading out into rough waters, struck a sandbar. A steam pipe burst, disabling the engine. Pieces of the wreck were left in the channel for almost 3 years until it was finally dragged out further into Lake Michigan and sunk in 80 feet of water. When they rebuilt the pier in 1999 and 2000, pieces of the vessel were found on the bottom of the lake. Parts of the wreckage are still on display inside the museum. While those ship stories are deadly serious, another is a little more lighthearted. Around 1890, the Wanatee anchored in Pentwater Lake near the very scenic Little Bayou and Frenchtown. Men would board the boat in the evening and come home happy, but missing a significant amount of cash. Their wives eventually figured out that there was gambling and drinking happening on the Wanatee, and they took matters into their own hands by arranging for a fire to be started on the boat. It burned to the waterline, and when the water on Pentwater Lake is quite low and clear, the wreck can still be seen on the bottom of the lake.
You know, when I was in Las Vegas, they had the ship Titanic, yes.
Yes,
And
yep.
they had a large section. Well, it was huge, but it was just a little bitty section of the Titanic, but it was huge. And you could go in and look at it, and I got to touch it. So I touched a piece of the actual Titanic that they brought up from the wreck. Do you have any pieces of ships like that are sort of lucky charms that people touch?
We actually do. We have a few pieces from the Mary Stuart, and then we have a few pieces from the Novadoc also. The Canadian government gave them gifts, but in addition to that, well, the family of the men that survived, as the generation passed away, the members of those families gave some of the mementos to the museum. So, for example, we have the Novadoc ship bell, and I think that was one of the artifacts that my museum visitor especially wanted to see, because he had been sleeping next to that in his bedroom in his grandparents' house for many years.
That is very cool.
Let's talk a little bit about Pentwater's most recent history. It turns out that lots of creative people love to come to Pentwater, and they stay. In Pentwater, we have a very active arts community. One of those things, then, is the Artisan Learning Center. Some people actually choose Pentwater for retirement due to ready access to woodworking, clay and paint studios, kilns, glasswork, looms for weaving. It's hard to name all the arts that are done in the Artisan Center. It was founded in 2007 and has a large membership that can mentor and assist on projects. The Pentwater Arts Council is another active group. They have sponsored a variety of projects each year. Once during the pandemic, it was painted picnic tables that tourists and residents could vote for and then bid on. It was quite a fundraiser with some very inventive scenes on those picnic tables. And of course, it was very pandemic safe. Most recently, they've sponsored a sculpture walk for the last 3 years, where 5 selected sculptures are placed around town. This year, the museum is the site of one of those sculptures called the Lamplighter, and we're hoping the sculpture will be purchased and donated to the museum itself. Artist galleries and co-ops are situated in our shopping district with items for sale and classes for individuals and small groups. These activities are very popular with residents, their visitors, and tourists. I've been to several of these classes myself with friends, with my book club, and with my out-of-town visitors. And I really appreciate all the advice these talented artists give me, a very untalented artist. The museum is located 3 short blocks east of the shopping district with free admission for all. The museum runs on donations and the grants we receive. I should mention the granting organizations that have supported us, including the Michigan Arts and Culture Council, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, National Endowment for the Arts, Great Lakes Energy People Fund, Consumers Energy, Michigan Humanities, and the Michigan History Alliance. And of course, we received the bulk of our support from local businesses and private individuals through memberships and donations.
All right, I'd like to give the contact information for the Pentwater Historical Society and Museum. Their website is pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org. You can find them on Facebook at Pent H2O Historical Society. Their email is info@pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org. Their mailing address is Pentwater Historical Society, P.O. Box 54, Pentwater, Michigan 49449. If you'd like to visit the museum and while you're there drop off a donation, you can visit them at 85 South Rutledge, Pentwater, Michigan 49449. And you can phone them at 231-335-3689. All right?
Thank you, Sean. I'd like to talk too about what the museum is doing to offer history to our visitors. The last 5 summers, we have run a history cruise on Pentwater Lake and provided an inexpensive way for visitors to get out on the water and hear a bit of Pentwater's history in a very laid-back environment. It was quite popular in our little town. We are, however, dependent on a boat owned by the village, so we're always investigating other alternatives in case that boat is not available for some reason. We have also offered walking tours of the town, and some of the more interesting architectural features of homes and businesses can be seen on one of those architectural walking tours. You should know that we have a guide by cell program. We have a phone number you can call. You simply dial the number and type in the street or the block number of what you want to hear about Hancock Street. And if you're inside the museum, you see numbered exhibits. You can use that phone number to hear more details about the object that you're looking at.
I know, I love that. That's so innovative.
Yeah, we had a great docent who discovered this when he was visiting another museum, and he convinced us to implement it as well. So you'll hear his voice on those recordings.
Yeah, very cool.
I want to talk a little bit too about our most recent exhibits. In 2023, we developed something that we call Building Stories. We did this in conjunction with a historian mom and her artist daughter. Pamela, the mom, researched the stories and wrote the text for each panel, and Libby, the daughter, created an illustrated map of Pentwater, showing important sites and events. You can see the stories scattered throughout our downtown businesses and on the website, pentwaterbuildingstories.com. The map is for sale in our museum or online at libbyvanderploeg.com. In 2024, we installed a new exhibit, which is the USS Sequoia model. If you're not familiar with this story yet, let me explain. Why is a U.S. ship in a museum in Pentwater, Michigan? The Sequoia was actually a presidential yacht based, of course, in Washington, D.C. It was just one of a long line of yachts and ships used by presidents to conduct official business. It has a fascinating history because it was originally purchased by the government to entrap bootleggers. An elegant trumpet yacht, 109 feet long, the feds would stage what looked like a party on board. Bootleggers would approach to sell alcohol, and the agents on board would arrest them. After Prohibition ended, the yacht was turned over to the president. Sequoia served presidents from Hoover through Ford until President Carter elected to sell it in 1977 as a cost-saving measure. While in the president's service, it hosted meetings with the president and other diplomats such as Winston Churchill. Gerald Ford held cabinet meetings on the boat. It has seen a lot of history happen on the boat. Once President Carter sold the boat, it passed through various owners until a trust made plans to use it as a floating museum. To raise funds for their plan, the Sequoia made a tour of the eastern half of our continent on the Great Circle Tour. The Sequoia did the Great Circle Tour not once but twice. It's a route that takes a boat down the eastern seaboard, across or around Florida, and up through the South and the Midwest on rivers, all the way up to the Great Lakes, then back to the East Coast through Canada or New York. The whole route usually takes about 6 to 12 months to complete.
Wow.
The Sequoia stopped in Pentwater for a 2-night stay in 1984. The first night was a fundraising dinner on board, and the next day the Sequoia was open for the public to tour her. It was like a rock star had come to Pentwater. There was a line of people that went across our village green and down Hancock Street, waiting to enter the boat.
Yeah, I would have been one of them.
It looks like it's pretty cool, even just looking at the model that's now installed in our museum.
That is just amazing that they built a 9-foot model of the USS Sequoia.
And there's quite a story behind the building of the model, too. There was a model builder by the name of Fred Wolf who started the model and worked on it for years, but only completed the hull and part of the main deck and had done nothing at all with the upper deck. He passed away before he could finish it. His condo and all of his items were purchased by a neighbor who did not now know what to do with the 9-foot model of the Sequoia. Wow. During 2019, a cousin of that new owner of the model was visiting Pentwater, and he's just kind of a yachting, interested person. And he started asking around, and he asked at the Brass Anchor, and the owner of the Brass Anchor said, "Oh, I know all about the Sequoia. I visited here twice." And he took one of our history cruises, and the man on board said, "Oh, we know all about the Sequoia. I visited here twice. I was here." In fact, the captain of the history cruise that day had actually helped serve the dinner to the fundraising group on that first night. They had kind of pressed into service or conscripted 3 young men from Pentwater. One was the dishwasher, one was the bartender, and one was the waiter that served the dinner. Once he found out that Pentwater had a connection, he contacted some museum representatives, and they all agreed that the model should come to Pentwater. It took us about 2 years to find someone that could complete the model. And then once we got it to the artisan, it took him another 2 years to actually finish the model. But it's gorgeous. I can send you a picture if you want, but you might be able to see it on our museum also.
Yeah, there's one on the website, or did I see it on YouTube? I can't remember, but there is one out there that I saw.
Yeah, it might be on Facebook also. It's a beautiful thing. It was a Trumpy yacht, so it had actually been in private ownership for several years before the government bought it. It was actually first built in 1925.
The USS Sequoia, though, was a presidential yacht, right?
Correct.
I don't know what presidents used to do, or if they still have a presidential yacht today. Do they run around on the water?
They mainly used it for diplomatic reasons, I think. Hoover was the first president to use it, and he actually used it for fishing trips. FDR was also fond of fishing, and so he used it for fishing trips, but he was the first one to probably use it for diplomatic reasons. Okay. So we know that Winston Churchill was on the boat. We know that some of the Marshall Plan meetings occurred on the boat. Some of the NATO Plan meetings occurred on the boat. Kennedy really enjoyed yachting, and so he had not one yacht, but 2. He had the Sequoia and one other that was a little bit larger.
That's really something. Now, the USS Sequoia, does the real version, is it still around?
It does exist. There's a company that's trying to raise money to restore it, but it kind of has fallen on hard times.
Oh, yeah.
So last I heard, there was more than one family of raccoons living inside the boat, and it had experienced some damage while being moved around.
And do you happen to know where it is?
I believe it's back in Maryland right now.
Okay.
It was transported to Maine right before the pandemic started, and they thought they could repair it up there. But because of the pandemic, everything shut down at that particular shipyard. Oh, yeah. So it's now probably changed hands again, but somehow or another, it's been transported back to Maryland. Oh, you can actually see videos of the ship being moved, covered in plastic, on a barge, going up and down the coast and being loaded then into the new shipyard.
Yeah, I'm going to go look for it. That sounds really cool.
It's a fascinating story.
I haven't heard like recent presidents like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama being out on a presidential yacht. I don't know if they do that anymore.
No, I'm not sure that they do. I know I heard that Ronald Reagan, for example, preferred horses and ranches.
Oh, yeah.
Eisenhower didn't like the boat at all. He preferred tanks. And then Carter, of course, was a very economically minded president, and he was the one that elected to sell it in 1977.
Do you exhibit anywhere else in the county, like the post office or the library or any of that?
Well, and that's an interesting question because our 2023 exhibit, the Building Stories exhibit, is actually scattered throughout businesses around town. We tell the stories of those buildings or events that happened near that site, and those are posted in the buildings. There's a coffee shop in town, and last Saturday when I was a docent, a young couple came in and said, "We saw your stuff in the coffee shop and we wanted to come visit."
Yeah, cool. Another reason to exhibit all over the county. Beth, what volunteer opportunities are available for community members looking to get involved?
That's a great question, Sean. We are always looking for more volunteers. We are a completely volunteer-run museum. The things that I would recommend the most is kind of the way I started that museum was I was a little bit interested. And I thought, well, maybe I should just volunteer at the museum for a few hours once a month. And I did that, and I discovered that while history was my least favorite subject in school, it turned out to be a fascinating topic to learn about now that I was living in Pentwater. Docents are always needed at the museum or on our cruises or tours. But then other areas where we could use more volunteers is we are actually working to digitize our paper artifact collection. We need a couple more people to do scanning, maybe once a week during the summertime for just a few hours, or once a month, whatever you can afford. And by the way, we received a grant to help us get started on this project. We received a loaner scanner for a little while to help us understand how it was done and what we would need. And then we received a grant to buy the scanner and other equipment for ourselves.
Nice.
So we're using the equipment year round now, which I'm very pleased with. But if we only have a few volunteers, it could take us decades to do this. And we definitely want to speed up the process.
Yeah.
The other part of the scanning project that we'll need help with is that we have software that can do character recognition of anything that's typewritten after we scanned it. So that makes it searchable. When we post these items on the internet, people can actually search our collection.
Nice.
In the meantime, though, many of these items are handwritten. So we're using volunteers to actually write a transcription of those handwritten documents that we've scanned so that we can then post the text of the transcription on the web.
Now, there's some AI programs out there that you can just read what's on the page and then upload that file and it transcribes it and puts it into text, and then you can just review that.
That's actually a strategy we're using for our oral interviews. So when I go to classes about how to do things like this, they warn that for every hour of spoken interview, you might need to allow 10 hours to transcribe it into something useful. But there are some AI tools available now that are relatively low cost for a nonprofit organization, where you can just feed in your audio file and you come back with a transcript. It's still got errors in it. AI is not perfect yet, and it has trouble detecting some of the patterns of speech that we all use. But we can cut our volunteer time down from 10 hours to maybe 2 hours and actually to review the transcripts and make them more accurate.
Very cool. Thank you for the information on volunteers. I hope our listeners go and support the society and volunteer. Beth, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's time for us to take a break for a few minutes.
I am ready to take a break. Thank you, Sean.
Yep. Listeners, we'll be right back after these important messages.
Are you looking to give back to your community, learn something new, or simply make a difference? The Pentwater Historical Society and Museum in beautiful Pentwater, Michigan, needs your help. The museum is more than just a collection of old artifacts. It's a living, breathing center of community life, filled with stories that span generations. And guess what? You could be part of that story by becoming a volunteer. Whether you're passionate about history, love working with people, or just have a few hours to spare, the Pentwater Historical Society has the perfect volunteer opportunity for you. From greeting visitors and leading tours, to helping preserve and organize historic artifacts, they've got something for everyone. Are you a tech-savvy individual? Help them digitize records and ensure the archives are accessible to future generations. Love event planning? Help them organize fun community events that bring Pentwater's history to life. Enjoy writing or researching? Assist with enabling publications or developing engaging exhibits that share the unique stories of the town. At the Pentwater Historical Society, they believe that history is for everyone. And so are their volunteer opportunities. No matter your background, experience level, or interests, there's a way for you to get involved. Volunteering with the Pentwater Historical Society and Museum is a fantastic way for you and your family to connect with the community, learn about local history, and make lasting friendships along the way. Imagine spending your days surrounded by fascinating exhibits, chatting with visitors from near and far, and making a real impact in preserving Pentwater's heritage. Plus, as a volunteer, you'll get exclusive access to events, behind-the-scenes tours, and the chance to work with some of the most intriguing artifacts in the area. So, how can you sign up? It's easy. Visit online at pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org, where you can learn more about volunteer opportunities and express your interest. Prefer to talk to someone directly? Give them a call at 231-335-3689 or drop by the museum at 85 South Rutledge and speak with our friendly staff. They'd love to hear from you. There's something incredibly special about being part of a team that's dedicated to keeping the past alive for future generations. And you can be part of that team. Whether it's a few hours a week or a special project here and there, every bit of help goes a long way. Not only will you be contributing to something bigger than yourself, but you'll also be gaining valuable skills and experiences, all while having a great time. Are you retired and looking for a rewarding way to spend your time? A student hoping to build skills and connections? Or someone who just loves Pentwater and wants to give back to the community? The Pentwater Historical Society has a spot for you. The Pentwater Historical Society and Museum needs volunteers to lead museum tours and share the town's amazing history with visitors. Help organize and preserve priceless artifacts and documents. Assist with fun community events and educational programs. Engage in fundraising efforts to support the museum's mission. And much more. Volunteering is flexible, and you'll receive all the training you need to feel confident in your role. Bring your passion, your energy, and your love for history. They'll provide the rest.
Join the dedicated team at the Pentwater Historical Society and Museum, where every volunteer helps to preserve the stories of Pentwater's past and share them with future generations. Together, we can keep the spirit of Pentwater alive and thriving and have fun at the same time. Visit pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org, call 231-335-3689, or drop by at 85 South Rutledge today to get involved. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Pent H2O Historical Society for updates on events and new volunteer opportunities. Let's work together to keep Pentwater's rich history alive, one volunteer at a time.
This is Cheyenne Janstetter, Archives Manager and Outreach Associate at the Museum of Danish America. Happy Thanksgiving from Elkhorn, Iowa.
This is Megan from the Fighting Falcon Military Museum, and we just want to say Happy Thanksgiving from Greenville, Michigan.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Vanette, Outreach Coordinator at the Castle Museum of Saginaw County History. This Thanksgiving, feast on some delicious history with Preservation Oaks and Sean Radcliff.
And now, back to Preservation Oaks.
Welcome back to Preservation Oaks. I'm your host, Sean Thomas Radcliff, and we're here today with Director Beth Russell from the Pentwater Historical Society located in Pentwater, Michigan. Let's pick up where we left off. I'm learning a lot. Thank you, Beth, and welcome back.
Thanks for the break. Sean, let's talk a little bit about the Ladies Literary Society and a couple of other clubs in Pentwater. The Ladies Literary Society was actually founded in 1898 for the betterment of the community. It is actually the longest living club in Pentwater. Much more so than today's book clubs, they worked to make books and literature available among the community. As the library eventually became available in Pentwater, around 1960 or so, they renamed their group to be the Pentwater Women's Club, and now their primary work is to provide scholarships to local Pentwater High School graduates. Other clubs are available in town too for folks new to Pentwater. These clubs make Pentwater unique in many ways, like the Garden Club and the Service Club. The Garden Club exists, you would think, just for home gardens, but in fact, they also take responsibility for beautifying and maintaining flora around the downtown area. The Service Club handles community projects around town that go beyond what the village or township can do, doing everything from helping to put up the Christmas decorations to organizing the start of summer party held in June each year. In 2020, they created a community garden with 25 raised beds for use by locals with a green thumb. They also make the most delicious caramel corn to raise funds for their projects, sold at the art fairs and in local retail stores. Some people compare their caramel corn to crack cocaine, and I say that in jest, but it is really quite addictive.
I bet it's good.
We have a number of arts and crafts fairs that occur in Pentwater from May through September, and Pentwater itself stays remarkably busy. Art fairs, silent auctions, farmers markets, and band concerts on the green are all among the old school events happening in Pentwater. Other events happen in the off-season too, like a February Winterfest, complete with an ice fishing contest and a wine tasting event. In August, there's a wooden boat show. In July, there's a Back from the Mac party. Of course, the Chicago to Mackinac race occurs every year, which is a really big deal. Once they get there, they have to get back to Chicago. So they typically spend a couple of days coming down the coast of Michigan, and one of their favorite stops, the racers, is Pentwater. So they'll stop and we'll have a party to welcome them back to Pentwater safely.
That's great. Is that like in July or something?
Yep, it usually occurs sometime late in July.
Yeah, cool.
We also have weekly sailboat races twice a week for ensign class boats, and every 5 years or so, the annual ensign regatta will be held in Pentwater. By far the biggest event in town is homecoming. We dedicate a whole weekend in August that includes a sand sculpture contest, a parade, and fireworks on Saturday evening, among other events. The band concert on the Village Green and the parade at homecoming have some of the best entertainment of the year, including not only the Pentwater Civic Band, but also the Scottville Clown Band. This past year, we had over 70 entries in the parade, with the Scottville Clown Band providing the finale to the parade. And I'm proud to tell you that Pentwater Historical Society won first place for their float this year.
That is very cool. Congratulations.
Thank you. We were quite proud. I want to tell you a little bit, too, about brick making in Pentwater. In 1862, clay was found along the north bank of Pentwater Lake. There were several attempts made at brick making, the most successful being Charles Mears's company. He called his company the Middlesex Brick and Tile Company, still attached to those Massachusetts names. Many of the buildings in Pentwater were rebuilt from those bricks after one of those fires. The bricks are a pale yellow color, almost white, due to the amount of lime in the clay, as opposed to the iron contained in reddish bricks. We know the exact location of the kiln for the brick and tile factory because the property owner attempted to plant a garden and discovered brick after brick after brick. Other buildings around town made with Pentwater brick include the Gustafson's Building, the Hancock Building, the Community Hall Building, the museum, formerly the Baptist Church, and the Brass Anchor Building, which originally housed the offices of a sawmill, then the Pentwater newspaper, a candle factory, and most recently a ship's chandler store. That building is currently being renovated. One of the premier buildings built out of Pentwater brick was the White Elephant Building. It was constructed during the 1890s by George Williams, a businessman from Chicago, who planned to build a hotel there named after his wife, Valeria. Unfortunately, after local investment, in addition to his investment, there was a market crash in the 1890s that meant he lost all of his capital. He simply vanished from Pentwater and never came back, with the building being only half completed. Eventually, the village allowed businesses and events, such as a butcher shop, a potato market, and others, to occur inside the building or right outside it. The round tower had been completed, or at least mostly completed, and it seated almost 500 people, so it hosted theater productions and musical groups. Movies, when they came out, were shown there also, but of course only silent movies. The White Elephant burned in 1927 and again in 1929. The brick was repurposed to build a new theater on a portion of the property where the White Elephant building stood, nicknamed the Miracle Theater, since it showed talkie movies. The remainder of the property where the White Elephant stood became the Village Green. A central point in the village, it's the site of year-round activities. In the 1950s, there was an information booth manned by a Mrs. Esther Dempsey, who knew everything that was happening in town and where it was happening. Also available were shuffleboard courts, badminton and tennis courts, and equipment available for use. Today, we have a gazebo that is a center point for festivals and weekly band concerts. Two of the buildings that I mentioned that have Pentwater brick were the Brass Anchor and the Community Hall. The Community Hall was that brick building built in 1883 by Sands and Maxwell for its headquarters. After the adjacent building burned down in 1920, the Sands family offered to sell the building to the village for community purposes for $8,000. The Pentwater Mothers Club began fundraising. Finally, in the fall of 1929, voters passed a bond issue and bought the building. Starting in August 1930, that new community hall opened. In it was a library for 66 years, village township offices until 2021, a basketball court on the second floor that was used until 1973, a fire truck bay on the first floor, and police until 1985. The Historical Society was in there until 2014, when we moved to our new building a few blocks east. One additional thing to mention is commercial fishing in Pentwater. There were many commercial fishermen in Pentwater over the years, beginning when the first settlers of European descent arrived in the mid-1800s. Writings in 1910 describe life at one fishing business that started in 1910 near the train depot. It was tough work. Fishermen had to pull heavy fish-laden nets out of Lake Michigan by hand. They would start around 4 a.m. so they could return to town, clean their catch, ice it down in barrels that were put on that day's train to Chicago, which then got there by dinner time. You might ask, where did they get the ice in the spring and summer and fall? It was cut out of frozen Pentwater Lake in winter, stored in ice houses, using sawdust to separate the blocks of ice, as well as to insulate the building so the ice wouldn't melt. The last commercial fisherman in Pentwater was a man by the name of Bud Stenberg. He died in 2013 after years of working with his brother Fritz. They had both served in World War II. When discharged, they started the business where they caught, smoked, brined, and sold fish. Their first boat was a 16-foot wooden boat named Pollywog, but they expanded their business and their boats over the years. Some may remember the scourge of alewives in the Great Lakes. To combat the proliferation of tiny, dying fish heaped up on beaches, the state introduced salmon into the Great Lakes.
Wait, what's an alewife?
You don't know what an alewife is, Sean?
No.
An alewife is a tiny fish that kind of looks like a herring. It was actually brought into the Great Lakes in the bilge water of boats that came up the St. Lawrence Seaway. They had to dump their bilge water. They ended up releasing many of these alewives into the Great Lakes, and they just proliferated all around the Great Lakes.
So it's a little fish, and it kills other fish that wash up on the shore?
No, it became a nuisance because it died and washed up on the shore.
Oh.
So there were tens of thousands of these fish in the 1960s, and the state park here in Pentwater literally had to get a bulldozer and clean them off the beach every single day.
My goodness.
They're a cold water fish, and occasionally the temperatures in Lake Michigan would warm up to the point where they couldn't survive, and they would wash up on beaches everywhere.
Is that still going on?
We get a couple of alewives, but the state did actually something quite unique. They ended up introducing salmon into the Great Lakes in quantities that would then eat the alewives.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So salmon actually has become a huge sport fishing tourist attraction in Pentwater. We have several boats that charter just for salmon fishing when it's available.
There's some pretty smart people around, you know it.
There are some very smart people around. Thank you.
That brings me to the fish. I mean, you probably have some wonderful restaurants with fresh fish.
Well, I have to say my favorite is whitefish. It's caught in Lake Michigan up and down the coastline, and it's served in many of the restaurants in Pentwater. We have I'll put in a shameless plug for a little restaurant called Bortel's, where they catch the fish all season long and they serve it just in the summer. And when they run out of fish, they close.
Oh, that's wonderful. A wonderful story.
Yeah, I highly recommend Bortel's. It's a great little fish experience.
I
So
had that experience in San Francisco where you could go down to the pier and the ships would come in and you could look at the fish, say, that one is the one I want, and they would take it to a restaurant about, 30 feet away and cook it up for you.
that's pretty close to how Bortel's works. You line up in their little lobby area and you checking out the case of fish. And you say, I want 1.5 pounds of white fish. They fry it up and they pass it over the counter to you right there.
Wow. Now, whitefish is a breed like cod, or is whitefish a category and cod is in the category?
No, it's a separate species.
Okay.
So we call it the Great Lakes whitefish. I imagine there's an Atlantic whitefish too, but Lake Michigan whitefish is the best. I mean, there's plenty of perch too. Perch is an awesome. There's a little restaurant here in Pentwater that serves perch tacos year round, and we love it.
Okay, cool. Another reason to be a tourist at Pentwater.
Absolutely. It's a good place to go.
Yeah.
I do have to say too that occasionally we have rather large storms come through Pentwater. In 2020, there was a log that was dislodged from the Pentwater Marsh. It probably sank during a storm or just was overrun by other logs and got lodged in the mud up in the marsh. And a big storm dislodged it, and down it came floating into Pentwater Lake. When they look at it, they could see a brand from the 1800s that was probably maybe a logging company that was hired by Mears to take logs out of the woods.
Oh, cool.
They counted the rings on this thing, which was harvested in, maybe the 1860s or 70s. And they counted 190 rings on that tree, which means it was 190 years old when it was chopped down.
Now, did they cut out the brand and you have it in the Historical Society?
They did. We actually, they gave us the entire log, but it was a little too long to store in its entirety. So we did save the brand, and we have saved the parts that we can display legitimately.
Very cool. I was hoping you were going to say that.
Absolutely.
That is very cool. Huh.
The lumber industry was actually pretty neat. You might have been a chopper, you might have been a swamper, you might have been a sawyer, you might have been a teamster, snaking the logs down to the riverbank and through the river. But my favorite job, I think, was called lumber shovers, because what they did was they literally took the planks that came from the sawmill and they shoved them into those 2-masted schooners. They went from the floor of the boat all the way up to the deck and shoved them in underneath the decking. So you had basically one solid piece of wood there floating down Lake Michigan.
Oh, very cool. Cool. Thank you for that.
I want to talk a little bit about what we're planning in the future.
Okay.
And that includes a couple of exhibits. We're actually starting a series of oral interviews for people that have lived in Pentwater for many, many years, grew up in Pentwater, stayed here, left and come back, because we want to talk about an exhibit that we're going to call Journeys to Pentwater. When you arrived here in the 1800s, you probably arrived by ship or by train, but people came from all over. We had immigrants from Germany. We had immigrants from Ireland. We have some great books written by a particularly inventive Irishman by the name of Cahill. And it was really a kind of a melting pot. It probably looked much like Chicago and New York because you had all nationalities here. That same thing is really happening now. We have people coming from all over, maybe not across the Atlantic or the Pacific, but we do have people coming from all over to both Pentwater and Oceana County.
You have such a history of people from a bit of everything, where you've got street names that are from the signers of the Declaration of Independence. You've got Massachusetts street names. Pretty cool place.
Yeah. Oh, and I wanted to talk about one other exhibit. Our Journeys to Pentwater, our eventual plans are to make that into maybe a cross-section of a train car. And then we will have interactive screens so that people can figure out which decade they want to hear about and listen to the stories of coming to Pentwater in that decade.
Oh, that's very cool.
And then, of course, you know that the 2026 is the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the 250th anniversary. Given that we have so many signers represented here in Pentwater, we want to do an exhibit that will premiere in 2026 to talk about those street names and the names of the men and the values that they represented.
That's a great idea. Declaration of Independence signers. That's perfect. Do you have professionals doing your exhibits, or do you get involved and design the exhibits?
Well, there's a little bit of a combination of both of those. So when we installed the USS Sequoia exhibit, we had spent quite a bit of money on the model itself, and we got, of course, grants to help us fund that. But then we ran into a snag in terms of how do we actually create an exhibit other than the model itself. So myself and a couple of other volunteers from the museum went to some classes that were offered either by the Michigan Museum Association or by AASLH, the American Association of State and Local History Museums. And all of those courses and webinars were really quite helpful in helping us figure out how we could do that. So we've got things to learn, but we did the research and we created an exhibit for the Sequoia. And eventually we'll probably pay some professionals to create our exhibits for our Journeys to Pentwater exhibit. But we're investigating to see what we can find out how to do in the short term with interactive exhibits that will be more approachable for some of our visitors.
Yeah, very cool.
I do highly recommend, if you can't hire a professional, then go ahead and take some of those classes and help you understand some of your options for creating some new exhibits.
Yeah.
In our 5 to 10 year plan, we are planning an expansion to the museum. We're actually in the midst of what we call the silent phase or the quiet phase of our fundraising. We're about 50% of the way to our goal. So once we reach about 80%, our campaign will go public and we'll start to publicize it in papers and things like that. But we do appreciate all the good advice we've gotten from professionals that have homes here in Pentwater and have an interest in Pentwater, because they're helping us understand how best to do that fundraising. And so I'm proud of the fact that we're basically 50% of the way to our goals to expand the museum by doubling its space, adding an outdoor exhibit area for those things like that historic 362-year-old log. I mean, you need space to do those things, right?
Yeah.
So we believe we can really expand the space and actually give ourselves a better event space at the same time, with both indoor movable exhibits is what we're looking at, and an outdoor exhibit area and courtyard where we can hold events.
Your museum being a church, churches were built so they have this large slanted ceilings, right?
Correct.
And high. Did you put a second floor in?
We have a balcony that we use for research and artifacts, paper storage and things like that. But in our plans for an expansion, we want to make sure that the look is basically the same. So we'll have a very high vaulted ceiling that will be a beautiful room for events.
Oh, yeah. Very cool. All right, Beth, I'd like to provide listeners with the contact information for the organization. The Pentwater Historical Society's website is pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org. You can find them on Facebook at PentH2O Historical Society. Their email is info@pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org. Mailing address is Pentwater Historical Society, P.O. Box 54, Pentwater, Michigan 49449. And if you want to visit the museum, and I hope you do, it's 85 South Rutledge, Pentwater, Michigan 49449. And if you want a phone, call 231-335-3689. That all sound right?
That sounds perfect, John. You got it all right.
Good. Beth, how does your organization collaborate with other historical societies, museum organizations at various levels?
That's a great question, Sean. We have in the state of Michigan, the Michigan Museum Association, and we have found it very valuable to be a member of that association and then participate in some of the activities that they hold, where we meet colleagues from across the state, learn how they do things, and share our own experiences as well. And it's been very productive, I hope, for everyone that's in that organization. But right here in Oceana County, we actually have several museums. And so the museums have really kind of decided not to step on someone else's toes, so to speak. And so we try and keep our history just mostly to Pentwater. We'd like to actually expand our programs to the schools. And some of the other museums are expert at other things. And so we want to make sure that we cover Pentwater's history and make it a little more available to both adults and kids in the school system.
Fantastic. Thank you. I wanted to ask about the strategies you're using to attract and involve young talent and their skills in your volunteer efforts.
That's another good question, Sean. We have been successful the last 2 summers in getting an intern into the museum. So far, it hasn't cost us any money because we've found ways to make it happen. And for example, our first intern was a PhD intern who needed to have volunteer hours at a museum working on things that then would qualify for his credit for his PhD program. And so that was really kind of an eye-opener to us. And we just kind of happened onto that as a way to kind of help expand our work and our skills. The next summer, we found there was a high school student from here in Pentwater that actually contacted us to say, I'm interested in history. I would kind of like to work at your museum before I go off to college. And we found a way to get the funding for him. It was not a huge amount of dollars, but it was still a big help to have a young person engaged in the efforts at the museum. And so I think, Pentwater is a rather small community, but students are starting to recognize that we're doing things. And we want to continue to work with, for example, we're working with a teacher to help develop a curriculum that will get kids a little more involved in history.
That was going to be my next question. That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. I'd like to ask, in what ways does your organization uniquely contribute to the community, and why is its role so crucial?
I think that history provides an education for every age group. It doesn't really matter whether you're 80 or you're 8. You can learn and grow through understanding what our predecessors did. And sometimes our predecessors were here 150 years ago or 250 years ago, or maybe just a few months ago. But it's all history. And when we bring students into the museum, they get that. Even though they're only 8 or 9 years old, when we say, what's history? Is yesterday history? And they absolutely know that it is. So I think that's part of what we want to do, is make sure that people can understand the role of the community, the role that people have played in the community, and then how they will fit into the community in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you. Resources and volunteers were unlimited. What new priorities and goals would your organization pursue, and how would it transform your operation?
Oh my goodness, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
We have so many objects and so many records that if we had additional resources and volunteers, I would focus on doing a complete inventory and making sure we have the proper storage space for everything in our inventory. It's a big job running a museum, and we've been around for over 40 years, and we're not yet perfect at it, but we're certainly working on it.
What are you using for your software? Is it Past Perfect or something else?
Well, we actually purchased Past Perfect several years ago, but never really implemented it. So at this point, as we do our digitizations and scanning, I'm having our volunteers put records into a spreadsheet that we can then eventually upload into Past Perfect or whatever tool we choose to use. We want to make sure that we get a web-facing product that people then can use to research the things that we have in the museum.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. So you need volunteers a lot.
Oh, yeah. We love volunteers. We want more. I do have to say that our museum is not very warm in the wintertime. So we have to come to some agreement about how we're going to accomplish our work over the winter.
Well, you have an off season. You're seasonal, right?
Yes, we are. We're only really open in the summertime right now. With an expanded museum, we would hope to be open throughout the winter in some capacity, even if it's just for research and occasional visitors. I was actually working in the museum just yesterday. We weren't supposed to be open, but darn if somebody did knock on the door and want to come see the museum. So I let them in. We had a good conversation, and I went away, I hope, knowing a little bit more about Pentwater's history.
Yeah, fantastic. So do you normally work in the museum with volunteers during the winter time just to get things done and then open up the next season?
Well, we have some work that needs to happen in the museum. We're improving our storage and archival methods, and that has to happen in the museum. We have a volunteer that can take a complete file and take it home to scan, and it might take him a couple of weeks to do that, which we're fine with. It just takes time. Yeah. So both of those things will happen. Work is done in the museum, or work can be done at home once you've learned the processes and procedures.
You mentioned expanding the museum. Are you expanding because you need additional exhibit space or because you need additional storage space for artifacts?
Well, I think, both of those things are true. We need additional exhibit space. We need additional storage space. But mostly it's because we want to improve how we meet the mission of the museum, which is to provide a community resource. We're asking people to support us, to donate, and we want to make sure that the facility we have is something that multiple generations can use together and create their own memories of Pentwater for future generations to come.
Yeah, good plan. Is there any additional message or important information you'd like to share with the community or your members?
I think what I want to share is that we want to be a resource for the entire community. We are doing fundraising now. with a smaller portion of the population, but what we have in mind will be a resource for the entire community, including residents, homeowners, part-time residents, and guests and tourists. Pentwater is a beautiful little town. I actually met someone just a few weeks ago, was a relative of mine. We had a relative come to visit us and stayed with us for a few nights so that they could attend a wedding. And it was a relative, such a distant cousin that I had never met them before. But they're in love with Pentwater because they had come every year as a child, just like I did with my kids. And they all come back to Pentwater sometime. So we want to make sure that those people understand the story of Pentwater and can eventually help and contribute to the community. We want to be a resource for the entire community, whether they're a visitor or a resident. And ultimately, we want to do that year round.
All right, Beth, I want to thank you for spending the time today to help us understand your area of the country and its history. I appreciate you being here very much. You have an excellent website. The Engage by Cell service is unique and interesting. I loved reading the reviews of the Society and Museum on the interwebs. People really enjoy the museum, the exhibits, and that there is so much to see and learn. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Sean. It was a great experience, and I hope to hear from you again.
And with that, we'll end our time with our guest, Beth Russell from the Pentwater, Michigan Historical Society and Museum. Listeners, please stay tuned for my comments and wrap-up, which is coming up next. Hey, I'd like to thank you, listeners, for joining us today on this deep dive into the incredible history of Pentwater, Michigan, with our guest, Beth Russell. Beth's dedication, passion, and knowledge are truly inspiring, and it's clear that she's an irreplaceable asset to the Pentwater Historical Society and Museum. Through her storytelling, Beth has made Pentwater's past come alive, inviting us to imagine the bustling lumber days, the silent courage of its shipwreck rescuers, and the community spirit that binds this town together. Beth shared with us the moving story of the SS Novadoc shipwreck and the harrowing rescue led by Pentwater's own Captain Clyde Cross. In the face of raging 30 and 40-foot high waves, Captain Cross and his crew took their boat out into the storm, risking their own lives to save 17 men stranded at sea. Years later, a visitor to the museum, the grandson of Captain Cross, sought out the artifacts from that fateful night, a powerful reminder that our connections to the past live on in the hearts of families and communities. Most people listening to this podcast won't ever have to know the fear that can come from being on board a ship confronting the raging sea. I was once on a boat in the Pacific Ocean on my very first fishing expedition when a storm came up and towering waves. And let's just say that as a passenger on that small bobbing boat, I was in awe of the natural might of the sea and became as lily-livered as ever an inexperienced person could be. It was terrifying. So I can tell you firsthand that stories like the ones Beth shared aren't just tales of history. They're legacies of stout-hearted courage and kindness that resonate across generations. The Pentwater Historical Society and Museum, with Beth and a team of devoted volunteers, plays a vital role in preserving these legacies. From the early indigenous Potawatomi connections to the bustling sawmills that shaped the town, every story and artifact is carefully preserved to honor Pentwater's roots and inspire future generations. And this preservation work isn't just done behind the scenes. It's truly a community effort. The museum thrives thanks to the many hours volunteers dedicate, and they're always welcoming new hands to help, especially with their ongoing digitization project. Pentwater is a charming small town located on Lake Michigan in northern Michigan. It's known for its natural beauty, outdoor recreational opportunities, and friendly community. It's situated on the shores of Lake Michigan, offering stunning views, beautiful beaches, and plenty of opportunities for water sports and activities. Pentwater has a family-friendly atmosphere. It's a small, close-knit community with a strong sense of family values. The town has several parks, trails, and waterfront areas that are perfect for hiking, biking, kayaking, and other outdoor pursuits. The town hosts various events throughout the year, such as concerts, festivals, and parades, which foster a sense of community and camaraderie among residents. If you've ever wondered how you can make a real impact, consider giving a bit of time as a volunteer. Even a few hours can help ensure that Pentwater's stories continue to be heard and cherished, and this is something the Society and Museum can really benefit from. I'd like to thank Beth for sharing Pentwater's remarkable history with us on this Thanksgiving episode. Her dedication to preserving these stories and her incredible storytelling gift have truly enriched our program, and we've learned how valuable places like Pentwater are to our country, our culture, and the future. One more thing to be thankful for. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Remember, history is something we carry with us, and together we have the power to keep it alive. If Pentwater's story has touched you today, consider supporting the museum through a visit, a donation, or by lending your time as a volunteer. By connecting to history, we connect to each other and to our shared legacy. One last time, I'd like to give the contact information for the Pentwater Historical Society and Museum. Their website is pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org. You can find them on Facebook at PentH2O Historical Society. You can email them at info@pentwaterhistoricalsociety.org. Their mailing address is Pentwater Historical Society, P.O. Box 54, Pentwater, Michigan 49449. If you'd like to visit the museum or drop off a donation, do so at 85 South Rutledge, Pentwater, Michigan 49449. You can phone them at 231-335-3689. Now, if questions occur to you and you'd like more information, please connect with the organization via the contact information provided. If you're a listener in the area the organization serves and you're not already a member, please consider joining and supporting them. I hope this information helps the audience understand how valuable the organization is to the community and what kinds of excellent services they have to offer to their members and the public. The Pentwater Historical Society and Museum is truly one of our nation's preservation oaks. So that's our Thanksgiving episode. I couldn't let this one pass without giving a big shout out to God for all the amazing blessings we've experienced in 2024. And of course, a huge thank you to you, our listeners, and behind-the-scenes crew, and everyone who's volunteered or donated to support these incredible organizations across the United States. What a wild year it's been. We've got listeners all over the world now. Sure, the U.S. is home, but can you believe we've also reached people in places like China, the UK, Germany, Israel, Uzbekistan, Brazil, Russia, Ghana, Hong Kong, Italy, and Sweden? It's mind-blowing. I'm beyond thankful for your follows, comments, likes, and emails. Seriously, you all make this so much fun. Thank you so much. I'm so happy you're enjoying the journey across the United States. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Music used today is from Cymbalbird, Alec Koff, Odin Mann, RS Audio, Original Soundtrack, Gentle Jammers, Andrew Vovchina, Snow Music Studio, and Scott Holmes. Microstream Radio is a registered trademark. You can visit us at www.microstreamradio.com. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted by Microstream Radio. Cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere without the written permission of Microstream Radio. Hopefully you found today's episode useful, informative, and thought-provoking. And if so, please like, comment, and follow or subscribe. Stay curious and keep exploring the incredible stories that shape our world. This is Sean Radcliff. I'll see you all next time on Preservation Oaks, and until then, keep on giving and keep on living the good life.